Hi everyone, welcome back to Life Technologies YouTube channel, and thank you so much for watching and supporting our channel. So this is another episode of our Huawei Lab simulation series, and in this episode we'll be discussing the third scenario that could cause the ISIS adjacency to fail to come up. So you've configured your ISIS on the routers, you've activated it on the interfaces, and when you check the adjacency, it's not coming up. So in our last two episodes, we've discussed two scenarios that could cause the ISIS adjacency to fail to come up. The first one was you've misconfigured the interface IP on the two devices. So you could have misconfigured the wrong IP, or you've configured a duplicate IP on the interface. That one will cause the ISIS adjacency to fail up. And that is why we recommended that when you start configuring, you need to do the ping test. You need to test the back-to-back connectivity between the two devices to ensure that you have properly configured the IP addresses. Apart from the IP misconfiguration, another scenario that we discussed in our scenario 2 is you've misconfigured the network entity. So when you are configuring ISIS, you always have to configure the network entity for the adjacency to come up. If you don't configure the network entity, the adjacency will fail to come up. And another thing that we checked is a duplicate network entity. So you always have to configure a unique network entity between the two devices for the ISIS to come up. And that's why it's always recommended that you need to generate the network entity from the loopback IP, which is always unique on all the devices. So in this episode, we'll be demonstrating the third scenario that could cause ISIS adjacency to fail to come up, and we will be using our router 2 and router 1. So you've configured ISIS on these two routers, you've activated on the interfaces. When you check the peering on R2, you only find that you have an adjacency to R4. When you check on R1, you only find that you have an adjacency to R3, which means we don't have an adjacency between R2 and R1. So this is what we'll be checking. And before we dive into the lab, just a kind request that if you are watching this video and you are yet to subscribe to our channel, kindly hit that subscribe button to support us and also to stay tuned in for more upcoming videos. So I will go into the lab. So we have R1 and R2. I'll start by R2. So on R2, if I display ISIS peer, you can see that we only have an adjacency to R4. We still need to have an adjacency established between R1 and R2. So on R2, we can do the basic checks, starting with scenario 1. You check the IP address configured between the two routers. So on R1, display IP interface brief. You can see that we have on gig 00, we have 10.10.8. So we can ping the local IP first, 10.10.10.8. It's okay. Then we can ping the remote IP, 10.10.9, which is also okay. So this one proves that the scenario 1 is okay. Then for scenario 2, we need to check the network entity. So I can display current configuration, configuration ISIS. This is the network entity configured. We are in ISIS 100. And then we can also check display IP interface brief to ensure that it's generated from loopback IP. You can see that this one is 1.1.1.2 and the network entity has been generated from that loopback IP. So it's a unique network entity. On R2, display IP interface brief. The loopback IP is 1.1.1.3. Display current configuration, configuration ISIS. You can see that we have also generated the network entity from the loopback IP. So we don't have any duplicate network entity configured between R1 and R2. So we need to go ahead and do further checks to ensure that we don't have any other issue that could be preventing the ISIS adjacency to come up. So we can also check display ISIS 100 interface. You can see that gig 001 is well configured in that ISIS 100. On R2, we can also check display ISIS 100 interface. You can see that gig 001 is also activated with ISIS 100. So we need to go further and try to establish why we are not getting the adjacency to come up. So one thing that we can do is we can recheck the configurations again. So on R1, display current configuration, ISIS. You can see that we have ISIS 100, IS level is set to level 1, core style is set to wide. We have the network entity, we have the IS name. On R2, display current configuration, ISIS. We have the IS level is set to level 2, core style is set to wide, network entity. Sometimes when you are checking this configuration, it may not be straightforward. For example, if you didn't pay attention, you may not realize that the IS level is misconfigured. We have ISIS level 1 configured on R1. We have ISIS level 2 configured on R2. So if you are not very keen, you may not realize that there is this one line of script that is wrongly configured. So you can use another command. If I display ISIS error, this is the command that we've been using. You can see that we are having mismatched level error packets coming in. We are at 158. If I rerun again, you can see that we are at 159. If I keep rerunning the same command, you see that the packets are increasing. So the issue is clear. We have mismatched levels. So when we talk of ISIS levels, we know that we have 3 levels. So we have level 1, we have level 1, 2, level 1 and level 2. And then we have level 2. So whenever you are configuring your adjacencies, you need to know that some of these levels may not establish ISIS adjacency between them. For example, level 1 will establish an adjacency with the level 1. That one will come up as a level 1 adjacency. Level 1 will also establish an adjacency with level 1, 2. So they will establish a level 1 adjacency between the routers with level 1 and level 1, 2. Level 1, 2 will establish an adjacency with the level 1. It will also establish an adjacency with the level 1, 2. And then it will also establish level 2 adjacency with level 2 routers. So this one has 3 options. It can establish adjacency with the level 1, which will be level 1 adjacency. It can establish level 1, 2 adjacency with level 1, 2, and it can establish level 2 adjacency with level 2. Level 2 can establish adjacency with the level 1, 2. And then it can also establish adjacency with level 2. So if you have a network, you have one router here, and you have another router here. And between these two routers, you configure this side is level 1, this side is level 1, the adjacency will come up. If you configure this side to be level 1, you configure this side to be level 1, 2, the adjacency will come up. Level 1 adjacency will be established. If this side is level 1 and you configure the other side to be level 2, the adjacency will not come up. And again, if you have level 2 and you have level 2, the adjacency will come up. If you have level 2 and you have level 1, 2, the adjacency will also come up. If you have level 1, 2 and you also have level 1, 2 on this other end, the adjacency will also come up. And finally, if you have level 2 and you have level 2, the adjacency will come up without any problem. So these are the scenario that you need to have in mind when you are configuring ISIS adjacency. Always know which levels can establish an adjacency with which level. So you have seen that the error between between the two routers R1 and R2 is because we've misconfigured the level between the two routers. And once we correct this one, so I'll go back to R1 and I change it to level 2. So on IPRA network, on a service provider network, we are always using level 2 so that the routers can exchange all the LSA informations. So I'll change IS level. And by default, the level is set to level 1, 2. So I will change the level to level 2. And now we expect our ISIS adjacency to come up. So if I display ISIS adjacency, you can see that we now have an adjacency established between R1 and R2. So this is the third scenario. You've misconfigured the ISIS level, and it will cause an ISIS adjacency to fail to come up. So you need to know which levels are compatible with which levels, and that one will save you time when you are troubleshooting ISIS adjacency on your network. So I hope you've enjoyed this session, and we'll be having another scenario in the upcoming episode. So please stay tuned in for the upcoming episode. Thank you, and see you in our next episode.